For the most part, in this tropic whaling life, a sublime uneventfulness invests you. You hear no news, read no gazettes, extras with startling accounts of commonplaces never delude you into unnecessary excitements. You hear of no domestic afflictions, bankrupt securities, fall of stocks, are never troubled with the thought of what you shall have for dinner. For all of your meals for 3 years and more are snugly stowed in casks, and your bill of fare is immutable. What's up guys, it's the host, you're watching The Gray Medium, and today I am diving into my second of 5 parts on Herman Melville's Moby Dick. I absolutely loved part 1 of my discussion on this book, so if you guys are interested in checking that video out, or parts 3, 4, or 5, make sure to look in the description down below. I'll have all the videos linked down there as they are uploaded. And if you happen to be new to The Gray Medium, this is the channel where I'm trying to find the balance between black and white, or in my case, gray. What that means to me is finding the balance between mind and body. So regardless of if I'm in the gym lifting weights or if I'm in the library reading books, I'm always trying to do one thing in one form or another to improve upon my mind or body. But for today's video, I'm going to go ahead and jump into chapters 26 through 50. For this grouping of chapters, I'm going to choose the 5 that are most important to me, and those 5 for this video are Chapter 35, The Mast-Head, Chapter 38, Dusk, Chapter 39, First Night Watch, Chapter 41, Moby Dick, and Chapter 42, The Whiteness of the Whale. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into chapter number 35, The Mast-Head. By this point in the book, Herman Melville is doing a great job of world building within a single ship, within the Pequod itself. Herman Melville has done a great job up until this point of explaining the different roles of different characters on the ship and explaining what is expected of the people in those positions, and then giving you a world-building aspect when it comes to him explaining the anatomy of the Pequod itself. Chapters like The Mast-Head really urge you to go to the back of the book, to look at these maps and to look at these drawings, and to start looking at some of these blueprints and drawings of the Pequod itself. And by doing that, you really gain a better understanding of the Pequod and of the world surrounding the Pequod that Herman Melville is really trying to convey through chapters like The Mast-Head. So in a book that's full of a lot of symbolism and a lot of really deep allegory, a chapter like The Mast-Head is so valuable because it's just world building, it's just flowery language, and it's really just showing how great Herman Melville is, not just at writing prose, but really how great he is at writing poetry as well, because this chapter, The Mast-Head, really just feels like some of the most beautiful, flowery poetry that you've ever read. So the Mast-Head is essentially a little perch that the sailors have to take turns standing on for 2 hours at a time. They climb up the mast and they stand on this perch, and they're essentially on the lookout looking for whales. So every sailor has to take his turn going up there, standing up there, and calling out to the sailors below if he spots any whales, that way they could go hunt them. The physical distance between the deck and the masthead perch is pretty significant, and it's really described importantly, and it's really related importantly to some pillars and some towers of historical importance. This masthead, which is supposed to be about 150 feet above the deck's surface, is mentioned here on page 168. Melville writes, "But neither Great Washington nor Napoleon nor Nelson will answer a single hail from below, however madly invoked to befriend by their counsels the distracted decks upon which they gaze. However, it may be surmised that their spirits penetrate through the thick haze of the future and descry what shoals and what rocks must be shunned." Ishmael makes it known that while he's up here, he almost feels like he's escaping the social hierarchy that exists within the Pequod. When you're out at sea, everyone has a role that they have to play. This is something that was touched up on in Chapter 1, Loomings. Essentially, going as a sailor versus going as a passenger means that there's some responsibilities and obligations that you have to upkeep. However, when Ishmael is given this task of climbing up the masthead and hanging out there for a couple hours, he's up there and he feels like he's above this social hierarchy. He feels like he's existing outside of the boundaries and the limitations of the Pequod. He feels like he's almost touching the heavens, this high up in the air, surrounded by water, 360 degrees everywhere around him. It's then that we hear on the next page, page 169, the quote that I opened this video with. The quote that explains how you're not worried about the fall of stocks. You're not worried about little trivial things that are happening on the land while you're out at sea. The only thing that matters is continuing to move forward, continuing to survive, and being completely immersed in the ocean. And this is something that I feel like really hits hard, especially reading this through a 21st century perspective, especially reading this through a 2024 perspective. Ultimately, it's really easy to get distracted by the news, by social media headlines, and by every notification that's popping up on your phone. I just got one right now on my laptop, but the point is that when you're out at sea, you're so present and you're so focused that that stuff completely escapes your mind. And the Mast-Head as a chapter really starts to paint that picture of what it feels like mentally to be separated from civilization for extended periods of time. The sea, in that regard, really allows for a really true, deep, introspective thought that is really difficult to actually fall into when you're dealing with the day-to-day struggles on land. And it turns out that Ishmael makes a really poor watchman, and he doesn't spot many whales. At least up until this point in the book, he hasn't spotted any whales, and it's really because he's just so enamored, he's so enraptured, he's so just captivated by this beauty and this magnitude of the ocean around him and just being really fully invested in that present moment. He touches up on this on page 171, and the quote carries over onto page 172. Melville writes, "Let me make a clean breast of it here, and frankly admit that I kept but sorry guard. With the problem of the universe revolving in me, how could I? Being left completely to myself as such a thought and engendering altitude, how could I but lightly hold my obligations to observe all whale ships' standing orders, keep your weather eye open, and sing out every time?" But Ishmael wraps the chapter up by kind of bringing himself back to reality and kind of bringing the reader back to reality as well. Ultimately, while he's having these daydreams and while he's having this euphoric moment, he's standing on two very narrow pieces of wood that are 150 feet above the deck's surface. Death is very much present here, and if he is to daydream too hard, if he is to space out too hard, he can seriously fall to his death. And this snap back to reality moment really gets portrayed very beautifully here on page 173. Ishmael writes, "There is no life in thee, now, except that rocking life imparted by a gently rolling ship, by her borrowed from the sea, by the sea from inscrutable tides of God. But while this sleep, this dream is on ye. Move your foot or hand an inch, slip your hold at all, and your identity comes back in horror." So, the next two chapters I want to go over are chapter 38, Dusk, and chapter 39, First Night Watch. Similar to what I said with those two chapters in part 1 that really went well together, I think that these two chapters, 38 and 39, have a really good cohesive aspect to them. I think that these two go together really well, simply because they're showing you how two different characters feel about the same exact subject, about the same exact series of events. The first mate slash chief mate, Starbuck, has always been described as really calm, cool, collected, well thought out, level-headed. I really think of that phrase, cool heads prevail, when it comes to this guy. He's been very responsible and he's been very logical up until this point in the book. It's at this point that Starbuck is really recognizing that Captain Ahab is quite literally mad, and that Captain Ahab has really lost his marbles. And there's a certain sense of hopelessness that Starbuck has when he's leaning over this mainmast, when he's kind of sitting there at dusk just reflecting on the situation that he's found himself in. The chapter itself begins with the quote, "My soul is more than matched, she's overmanned, and by a madman." It continues, "The ineffable thing that has tied me to him tows me with a cable I have no knife to cut." Starbuck has acknowledged that he's found himself in this situation on a boat at sea where he can't escape. He's trapped on this boat. Where else is he going to go? And he's really not happy to be on this ship with Ahab, especially after realizing how crazy Ahab is and how it is that Ahab is so determined to kill this white whale. And we start to see how Starbuck essentially believes in some sort of greater being, in some sort of God, in some sort of faith, in something other than himself. And the way he approaches this situation spiritually is really importantly noted here on pages 184 and 185. Starbuck states, "Oh God, to sail with such a heathen crew that have small touch of human mothers in them. Whelped somewhere by the sharkish sea, the white whale is their demigorgon." He continues on page 185. "O life, 'tis now that I feel the latent horror in thee. But 'tis not me, that's horrors out of me. And with the soft feeling of the human in me, yet will I try to fight ye, ye grim phantom futures. Stand by me, hold me, bind me, O ye blessed influences." Essentially, Starbuck in the chapter Dusk is a representation here of someone who, in a certain sense, believes in fate, in a certain sense believes in determinism, in a certain sense believes that there are factors outside of their control that they are at the mercy of, which paints the picture really well when you want to turn the page onto chapter 39, First Night Watch. Stubb, a more reckless, carefree second mate who's been described as a complete opposite of Starbuck. He's very loose, he's very free-flowing, he doesn't really care, he just kind of goes with the flow, figures things out as they come. He really has a completely different view on this same problem, and the chapter First Night Watch opens up with him stating, "Ha ha ha ha, hem, clear my throat, I've been thinking over it ever since, and that ha-ha's the final consequence. Why so? Because a laugh's the wisest, easiest answer to all that's queer. And come what will, one's comfort's always left, that unfailing comfort is, it's all predestinated." Ugh. Essentially, Stubb just doesn't care. He's like, look, it is what it is, I'm just gonna laugh at it. Stubb has already surrendered to this thought of the idea that he's completely out of control, and philosophically he's like, look, I'm along for the ride, what am I gonna do about it? I'm just gonna laugh. I'm just gonna laugh it off. If I live, I live. If I die, I die. If we kill the whale or not, whatever. I'm here, I'm just gonna enjoy the ride. And I find that so valuable because what Herman Melville here is doing is he's essentially giving this one problem, and then he's showing you two different characters who are two different archetypes of ways of thinking, and he's just really just looking at these characters and pointing out to us, the readers, that, hey, look, when life faces you with something, you know, whether you're on a ship with a madman and you can't escape, or it's some other problem that you have, one way or another, you could look at it either way. You could pray, you could beg, you could hope for something to change, you could hope for something to go your way, or you could just look at it and laugh at it. And I really don't think that Melville, nor we as readers, have any obligation to subscribe to either of the two beliefs. Ultimately, it's up to you personally to pick and choose what it is that you find is the more applicable thought process when faced with a problem similar to this one in your own life, but they both have their time and they both have their own place, and I think that Melville does a good job of using two different characters to really represent two different trains of thought. And for that reason, despite the fact that chapter 38 Dusk was 2 pages long and chapter 39 First Night Watch was only 1 page long, even these two chapters that combined for a total of 3 pages were important enough to me to where they needed to make this final cut for this video, because they really do challenge you to open your mind and to really just question the way it is that you perceive the problems in your own life. So by chapter 41, Moby Dick, Captain Ahab knows, and we know that Captain Ahab knows, that he needs the whole crew to be on board with his mission to kill Moby Dick. Ultimately, this isn't a one-man job, and he knows that he needs total cooperation from everyone on board in order for him to enact his revenge. So there's been a lot of manipulation done on behalf of Ahab up until this point in the book, in which he started to, you know, dig deep into these sailors and dig deep into these men's hearts and try to find whatever it is that really bugs them, whatever it is that really lingers in their soul. And then what he's doing is he's taking those things, those personal grudges, those gripes, those traumas that these men carry with them, and he's projecting them onto Moby Dick. These men really just went on a whaling voyage for one reason or another, but now he's starting to convince them slowly and subliminally that it is like their life's mission, it is their life's goal to kill the white whale, to kill Moby Dick. So there are some people who are hesitant of this, but as I stated in previous chapters, they know that Captain Ahab is in control of the ship, so one way or another, this whale has to get killed if they ever want to go back to land. This is touched up on here on page 195. The text reads, "And as the sea surpasses the land in this matter, so the whale fishery surpasses every other sort of maritime life, in the wonderfulness and fearfulness of the rumors which sometimes circulate there. For not only are whalemen as a body unexempt from that ignorance and superstitiousness hereditary to all sailors, but of all sailors they are by all odds the most directly brought into contact with whatever is appallingly astonishing in the sea. Face to face, they not only give eye its greatest marvels, but hand to jaw give battle to them. Alone in such remotest waters, that though you sailed 1,000 miles and passed 1,000 shores, you would not come to any chiseled hearthstone or aught hospitable beneath that part of the sun. In such latitudes and such longitudes, pursuing to such a calling as he does, the whaleman is wrapped by influences all tending to make his fancy pregnant with many a mighty birth." Essentially, while at sea, it's very easy to begin to project whatever it is that is really near and dear to your heart, whatever it is that is really bugging you, onto the whales that you're hunting. And that's why something like the white whale, something like Moby Dick, ultimately ends up becoming the scapegoat for most of the sailors on board the Pequod. In that sense, these men really are confronting their own white whale. So Ahab continues to weaponize these own men's insecurities or insufficiencies by projecting them onto the white whale as a means to an end to achieve his own goal. And there's something that's really important when it comes to understanding this and understanding how this applies to you if you're someone who ultimately chooses to pick up this book. I had a lot of different things that kind of nudged me in the direction of reading Moby Dick. The final thing that really pushed me over the edge, the final cherry on top, was reading Herman Melville's Benito Sereno as an assigned text in a course I took. That being said, there's a lot of parallels between choosing to read a 625-page book and choosing to go to sea to hunt a great whale. The text touches up on this here on page 197. Ishmael writes, "Nevertheless, some there were who even in the face of these things were ready to give chase to Moby Dick, and a still greater number who, chancing only to hear of him distantly and vaguely, without the specific details of any certain calamity, and without superstitious accompaniments, were sufficiently hardy not to flee from the battle if offered." Essentially what's getting hinted at here is that choosing to read Moby Dick, this huge book from beginning to end, is very similar to choosing to hunt Moby Dick, this huge whale, from, you know, the one sea to another. It could come back to something that Benjamin McEvoy said in one of his video essays, but he mentioned how you eat the white whale one bite at a time. You have to read Moby Dick one chapter at a time, and really this urge just to all of a sudden read this huge book and to try to get through it cover to cover can really be related to the sailor's urge to go kill this huge book, or to go kill this huge whale rather. And I think that anyone reading this book and really trying to get through it beginning to end has to, in one way or another, relate to Ahab at least a little bit. And because of that, Moby Dick, both the book and the whale, have taken on a supernatural, larger-than-life feel, which is really described well here on the next page, 198. Quote, "Moby Dick not only ubiquitous but immortal, for immortality is but ubiquity in time, that though groves of spears should be planted in his flanks, he would still swim away unharmed. Or if indeed he should ever be made to spout thick blood, such a sight would be but a ghastly deception. For again, in unensanguined billows hundreds of leagues away, his unsullied jet would once more be seen." Point is that Moby Dick as a novel is going to transcend time and space, as it already has, from the 19th century, here we are in the 21st. And the point is that Moby Dick as a legend, as a whale, has clearly transcended time and space for sailors all around the world coming from all different cultures. Moby Dick, both the whale himself in the novel and the novel itself, have been completely immortalized, and the fact that Moby Dick and a lot of Herman Melville's writings have been established as part of the American canon really proves that point pretty clearly. And Moby Dick, in that spiritual, larger-than-life, supernatural sense, has kind of become a symbol of determinism, or a symbol of, you know, forced will upon Ahab. Moby Dick has represented everything that is outside of Ahab's control, everything that he shouldn't be able to control, and it's something that he has to exercise his free will against. Hunting the white whale for Ahab is quite literally trying to prove that he is in control of his own destiny, and trying to prove that he is in control of the things that really, in the grand scheme of things, are completely outside of his control. The quote on page 200 states, "Ahab had cherished a wild vindictiveness against the whale. All the more fell for that, in his frantic morbidness, he at last came to identify with him. Not only all his bodily woes, but all his intellectual and spiritual exasperations. The white whale swam before him as the monomaniac incarnation of all those malicious agencies which some deep men feel eating in them." I have to wrap this chapter up. I could talk about this chapter for an hour on its own. But the point is that no one really signed up for this spiritual journey when they wanted to go whaling, the same way that I don't know if I even expected to go on this big of a philosophical journey when I started reading, but one way or another, that's chapter 41, and that's Moby Dick. In chapter 42, The Whiteness of the Whale, Herman Melville flexes his literary genius by going back and completely doing a full 180 on everything that he's stated about the whale up until this point. I really hate to read off of the script. It's something I'm strongly against, but I think that the only way I could really get this point across is by showing you guys some quotes and then just reading you directly what it is that I said from my commonplace book entry. On page 204, this tone is set emphasizing the importance of the whiteness of the whale, and the whiteness being his main descriptor, when the text reads, "It was the whiteness of the whale that above all things appalled me. But how can I hope to explain myself here? And yet, in some dim, random way, explain myself I must, else all these chapters might be not. In it applies to the human race itself, giving the white man ideal mastership over every dusky tribe. And though, besides all this whiteness, has been even made significant of gladness, for among the Romans a white stone marked a joyful day, and though in other mortal sympathies and symbolizings this same hue is made the emblem of many touching noble things, the innocence of brides, the benignity of age, though among the red men of America the giving of the white belt of wampum was the deepest pledge of honor, it has been made the symbol of the divine spotlessness and power. By the Persian fire worshippers, the white forked flame being held by the holiest on the altar, and in the Greek mythologies, great Jove himself being made incarnate in a snow-white bull. This elusive quality it is which causes the thought of whiteness, when divorced from more kindly associations and coupled with any object terrible in itself, to heighten that terror to the furthest bounds." Okay, I threw a lot at you, but essentially what is continued to get driven home with these first couple pages of this chapter is the idea that whiteness has always been associated with purity, with life, with holiness, with goodness. And that's so important because this whale is constantly described as the white whale. Moby Dick, his main descriptor is his whiteness. And ultimately, that doesn't make sense at all, because Moby Dick is supposed to be evil. Moby Dick is supposed to be what these characters are hunting. Moby Dick is supposed to be just terrible as a whole, and that's what really throws me off, and that's what really gets clarified with this chapter. Again, I hate to read off of the script, but let's go ahead and hop into what I said in my commonplace book entry. Ishmael makes it a point to explain how whiteness has always, across many different contexts, been associated with life, purity, goodness, and holiness, which draws attention to the fact that the white whale / Moby Dick's main descriptor is his whiteness, despite not matching any of those characteristics. From a race theory lens, I assume most would question why white is so positively represented. However, a more philosophical or even environmentalist lens really makes me ponder, why have we only described Moby Dick so negatively? Maybe Moby Dick is on par with all things naturally beautiful, holy, divine, pure, and full of life, and it is us that are projecting the negative colors or descriptors onto the whale. Ishmael closes the chapter by then pondering that very idea. that light on its own is white or colorless, and that we are the ones who wear colored lenses. And I believe that deeply, to my core. I do think that Moby Dick is in that sense symbolically representative of whatever scapegoats we use in our lives to project our hatred onto. Ultimately, this whale hasn't done anything wrong. These people are actively hunting this whale. It's just so enlightening to recognize that really, obviously, we know whaling now is terrible, especially, you know, looking at it from an environmentalist lens. This is pretty inhumane stuff we're doing here in this book. But the whole point is that this whale never did anything wrong, and even scripture, biblical scripture, quotes that, you know, whales, the great whales, are really the work of God, and in that sense they are, you know, like all life, God's gift to earth. And for us to project and to magnify all of our hatred for other things onto something that is as beautiful and majestic as a great white whale is really proving that, you know, the world in that sense is colorless, and we are the ones who wear colored lenses. This is a chapter that I'm going to cut myself off on because I will easily talk about this one for like 2 or 3 hours, but let's go ahead, we'll keep it moving. That being said, that is all I have here for part 2 of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. I really appreciate it a bunch if you've made it this far in the video, and please do stay tuned because I will have chapters 1, 3, 4, and 5 linked in the description down below, and we're going to be covering this book cover to cover, beginning to end. But of course, I appreciate you guys watching if you've made it this far. If you're interested in some more academic content, I'll have that included here on the screen, and if you're interested in some more athletic content, I'll make sure to have that included here on the screen as well. Of course, leave a comment down below to start a discussion, leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new. Until next time, this is the host, you're watching The Gray Medium. Stay gray.